The storm outside the Grand Meridian was nothing compared to the tempest brewing within its gilded walls. In the opulent lobby, chandeliers sparkled with a cruel light, casting long shadows over the marble floors where the elite walked without a care. Yet, downstairs in the humid boiler room and the cramped staff break areas, the air was thick with the scent of fear and mildew. A sealed letter, whispered about in terrified hushes, threatened to dismantle the delicate ecosystem of power that kept the hotel afloat. It was a symbol of a debt trap designed to crush the vulnerable, a mechanism of greed disguised as revitalization. Noah Harrington, a man who appeared to be nothing more than a humble shuttle driver, watched the chaos unfold with eyes that missed nothing. He knew that the screams of the guest about a forged notice were merely the first crack in the dam. Arya Kingsley stood behind the front desk, her smile masking the terror of a woman on the edge, supporting a sick parent and drowning in overdue bills. Their paths were destined to collide in a tragedy of rich versus poor, where romance would be a dangerous liability. As the rich panicked behind closed doors and the poor braced for the fallout, the stage was set for a public humiliation that would scar them all. Truth is the only currency that doesn't devalue, but can you afford the price? Noah's hands gripped the steering wheel tightly, the leather worn smooth under his palms. The rain lashed against the windshield, blurring the neon city lights into streaks of color. Inside the hotel shuttle, the air was thick with tension and the smell of wet wool. A guest sat in the back, screaming hysterically about a forged notice he had received. He claimed his signature was stolen, a victim of a massive, corporate theft scheme. Noah watched the chaos in the rearview mirror, his eyes cold and calculating. This was not just a drunk guest, it was the first tremor of a coming quake. Arya stood at the front desk, her knuckles white against the cool marble surface. She heard the shouting through the glass revolving doors, echoing in the empty lobby. The night manager was trying to calm the guest, offering empty platitudes and free drinks. But the guest threw the paper, hitting the pristine floor with a wet, heavy slap. It was a document claiming debt, a weapon of the wealthy elite used to destroy lives. Arya felt a shiver crawl down her spine, watching the ink begin to bleed on the paper. She knew the look of a debt notice all too well, it haunted her dreams every night. The guest was dragged out by security, still screaming about fraud and conspiracy. Gavin Rourke watched from the mezzanine, a glass of expensive scotch in his hand. His expression was bored, as if this chaotic scene were merely a minor annoyance. He didn't care about the guests' suffering, he only cared about the hotel's reputation. Noah pulled the shuttle around, the engine purring softly despite the raging storm. He glanced up at Gavin on the balcony, a look of quiet disdain in his dark eyes. But he said nothing, just waited for the next guest to arrive for his pickup. The sealed letter was mentioned in the shouting, a fleeting but crucial detail. The guest claimed he had proof, something that would ruin them all if it surfaced. Noah filed that away, his mind sharp and calculating in the shadows of the vehicle. He stepped out into the rain to help with luggage, water dripping down his face. His uniform was soaked, clinging to his frame, marking him clearly as just staff. To Gavin and the guests, he was invisible, just a part of the hotel's machinery. But Noah saw everything, the cracks in the foundation, the hidden lies they told. Arya slipped out the side door, needing a moment of fresh air to breathe. She saw Noah by the shuttle, looking like a statue standing in the downpour. Their eyes met, a silent understanding passing between them in the dark night. They were both trapped in this golden cage, struggling to survive the crushing weight. "Did you hear him?" Arya asked, her voice barely audible over the sound of the rain. Noah nodded slowly, wiping water from his brow with a rough, calloused hand. "He spoke of a letter," Noah replied, his voice low, steady, and serious. "He said it was sealed, that it proves the fraud they are running here," Arya whispered. She hugged her clipboard to her chest, shielding her heart from the cold wind. "If it exists, it could change everything for us," Noah said, looking at the hotel. The towering glass structure loomed over them, a monument to greed and ambition. But tonight, it felt fragile, like a house of cards ready to collapse in the wind. Noah reached out, his hand hovering near hers, a ghost of comfort offered. "We need to find it," he said, before pulling away to open the shuttle door. A new guest arrived, shaking off a black umbrella and stepping into the light. The moment of connection broke, replaced instantly by the demands of the job. Arya turned back to the lobby, her heart heavy with unspoken dread and fear. The screams had faded, but the fear they left behind remained potent and alive. Gavin had retreated to his office, likely planning his next move to hide the truth. Noah loaded the bags, his muscles tensing under the heavy weight of secrets. The night was just beginning, and the dangerous game was officially afoot. The next morning brought a harsh light into the cramped employee cafeteria. Arya sat at a plastic table, staring at a rent demand notice in her hands. It wasn't just a standard increase, it was a targeted eviction notice aimed at staff. The hotel was planning a redevelopment, and the staff housing was in the way. She looked around the room, seeing the same fear reflected in every tired face. These were the people who made the hotel run, and they were being discarded. It was a classic move of displacing the poor to make room for the rich. Gavin stood in the grand ballroom, gesturing to a model of the new complex. Investors clapped, dazzled by the glossy renderings of luxury condos and spas. "It is a true revitalization," Gavin said, his charm masking the cruelty underneath. But the numbers in the prospectus told a different story, one of a debt trap. The project was leveraged to the hilt, built on the backs of the workers he was evicting. He needed the land cleared, and he didn't care who he hurt to get it. The applause was hollow, echoing the emptiness of his moral compass. Noah polished the chrome of the shuttle, his mind racing with the new information. He had seen the notices being posted on the doors of the staff dormitories. It was a coordinated attack, a pincer movement designed to leave them with nothing. He noticed Arya sitting alone in the cafeteria, her head in her hands. She looked defeated, and the sight of it ignited a slow burn of anger in him. He walked over, placing a tray of cheap coffee and a donut on her table. "You look like you need this more than I do," he said softly. "They want us out by the end of the month," Arya said, her voice shaking. "It's not just the rent, they are docking our pay for relocation fees now." She slid the paper across the table, showing Noah the outrageous hidden costs. "It's a trap," Noah said, scanning the document with a critical, practiced eye. "They are creating a debt you can't pay, so they can force you out legally." He pointed to a clause about property improvements being passed to tenants. "This isn't a hotel policy, it's a predatory lending scheme disguised as a rule." Arya looked at him, surprised by his insight into the complex legal language. "You understand this stuff?" she asked, wiping a tear from her cheek quickly. "I've seen it before," Noah said vaguely, his eyes guarded and dark. "People like Gavin use the law as a weapon against those who can't afford lawyers." He took a sip of the bitter coffee, his jaw set in a hard, determined line. "We can't let them win, Arya. We have to fight back against this." But how? They had no money, no power, and seemingly no one on their side. The divide between the lobby and the back corridors had never been starker. Upstairs, the guests were enjoying complimentary mimosas and sunshine. Downstairs, the staff was calculating how many meals they could skip to pay rent. Gavin walked through the kitchen, ignoring the dirty looks from the chefs. He was a king in his castle, and the staff were merely the peasants to him. He saw Noah and Arya talking in the corner and frowned, suspicious of their unity. He made a mental note to separate them before they caused any real trouble. As the shift began, the weight of the impending doom hung over everyone. Arya put on her smile, checking in guests who were oblivious to her suffering. Noah started the engine, the roar drowning out the whispers of the staff. They were soldiers in a war they didn't choose, fighting for their survival. But Noah had a plan forming in his mind, a dangerous, risky idea. He knew that Gavin's arrogance was his weakness, the key to his undoing. And Noah was willing to risk everything to exploit that fatal flaw. Gavin's revitalization pitch was the talk of the town, at least in the right circles. Brochures with gold lettering promised a future of unparalleled luxury and profit. But Noah, tasked with driving investors to and from the site, listened intently. He heard the gaps in the narrative, the uncomfortable silences when questions arose. The numbers felt like a trap, a house of cards built on shaky, debt-ridden ground. They are leveraging the hotel's assets twice, Noah muttered to himself while waiting. He had seen the books, or rather, the glimpses of them he wasn't supposed to see. Arya watched from the front desk as Gavin charmed a potential donor in the lobby. He was brilliant, spinning a web of words that caught the wealthy and greedy. But she saw the way his eyes darted to the staff entrances, checking for leaks. He was afraid that the truth would slip out and ruin his grand, expensive plans. The revitalization was just a euphemism for a massive land grab and debt extraction. Arya felt sick to her stomach, knowing she was complicit just by working there. But she needed the job, the health insurance, and the meager paycheck to survive. Later that night, Noah found Arya resting on a crate in the loading dock. "The numbers don't add up," he said, leaning against the concrete wall. "I drove the city planner to the airport. He was worried about the permits." Arya looked up, exhaustion etched deep into the lines around her kind eyes. "Gavin acts like he owns the city," she said, her voice heavy with cynicism. "He doesn't need to own the city," Noah corrected her quietly. "He just needs to own the debt." The realization hit Arya like a punch. Debt was the real currency of power here. Noah handed her a folder he had found in the shuttle seat pocket. It was a discarded printout of the financial projections for the redevelopment. To a layperson, it looked like columns of random numbers and complex acronyms. But Noah had circled a few lines in red, highlighting a massive discrepancy. "The operational income is inflated," Noah explained, pointing to a specific figure. "If this project fails, the debt falls on the hotel's operating budget. That means payroll cuts, job losses, and foreclosure for the staff housing." Arya stared at the paper, her mind racing to understand the implications. "If the project fails, he just walks away, and we are left with nothing." "Exactly," Noah said, his voice grim. "He is using the hotel as a shield. He protects himself, while the staff bear the brunt of the financial ruin." It was a perfect example of the rich getting richer and the poor getting crushed. The glossy pitch was nothing more than a lure to entrap the unsuspecting. And the unsuspecting were the people who cleaned the toilets and drove the vans. "We have to expose this," Arya said, a new fire igniting within her. But fear quickly extinguished the flame she had her mother to think of. "If we speak up, he will destroy us, Noah. You know he will." Gavin was vindictive, and he had an army of lawyers at his disposal. Noah looked at her, his expression softening from intensity to concern. "Not if we find the proof that ties him directly to the fraud. He said there was a sealed letter that has to be the key we need." The night air was cool, but the tension between them was warm and electric. They were standing on the edge of a cliff, looking down into the abyss of corruption. It was a moral test: do they protect themselves or fight for the greater good? The easy path was silence, survival, and hoping the storm passed them by. But the hard path was truth, justice, and the very real risk of total destruction. Noah reached out and gently touched her arm, a silent offer of support. "I'll carry the burden, Arya. You just have to trust me," he whispered. Noah's job gave him access to places the management rarely visited. He was the invisible man, shuttling luggage, documents, and VIPs around the city. One afternoon, while waiting for a finance executive in the parking garage, Noah noticed a ledger left carelessly on the back seat of a parked sedan. The window was slightly cracked, and the cover bore the hotel's crest. Curiosity, a dangerous trait in his line of work, got the better of him. He snapped a quick photo of a page that caught his eye, then retreated. The signature on the ledger entry was wrong. It was a clear mismatch. A large transfer of funds was authorized by G. Rourke, but the handwriting was jagged. It looked like a crude forgery, a desperate attempt to move money unnoticed. Noah had studied Gavin's signature on dozens of documents he had transported. This was not the same. The loops were tighter, the pressure too heavy. It was a small detail, a planted crack in the facade of perfection. But it was the kind of crack that could bring down a mountain of debt. He chose silence, at least for the moment, keeping the photo secure on his phone. Revealing his knowledge too soon would tip his hand and put a target on his back. Besides, he needed to find the source of the forged authorization first. Who was helping Gavin move the money? Who was the hidden hand? Noah drove the executive back to the airport, engaging in idle, pleasant chat. The executive complained about the micromanagement from the director's office. They are obsessed with the revitalization numbers, the man scoffed, looking annoyed. Noah filed that away, piecing together the puzzle in his mind. Gavin was cooking the books, forging signatures to keep the project afloat. The revitalization was a sinkhole, and he was shoveling money into it frantically. The signature mismatch was proof of his panic and his unethical methods. But proof without context was dangerous. It could be explained away as a mistake. Noah needed the bigger picture, the thread that connected all the lies. He needed the sealed letter that the screaming guest had mentioned. Back at the hotel, Arya was dealing with a different kind of pressure. Gavin had called her into his office, a rare and unsettling occurrence. He sat behind his massive desk, offering her a seat with a cold, polished smile. "Arya, I've heard good things about your work," he began smoothly. "You have a knack for handling difficult situations with grace." Arya shifted in her chair, feeling like a mouse being eyed by a hawk. "Thank you, Mr. Rourke. I just try to do my job well," she replied. "I have a small task for you," Gavin said, sliding an envelope across the mahogany. "I need you to process these invoices for the redevelopment project. They are behind schedule, and I need them entered before the audit." Arya picked up the envelope. It was thick, stuffed with receipts and bills. Some of them were from companies she had never heard of, shell entities. "Normally, accounting handles this," she said, hesitating, her gut warning her. "They are swamped," Gavin snapped, his charm briefly slipping to reveal anger. "Just enter them, Arya. Don't overthink the job, okay?" he warned. It was a test, a way to see if she was compliant or a potential problem. If she entered them, she became complicit in his fraud, a convenient scapegoat. If she refused, she risked her job and her ability to care for her mother. She took the envelope, her hand trembling slightly as she stood up. "I'll do my best, Mr. Rourke," she said, her voice devoid of emotion. She walked out, feeling the weight of the dirty money in her hands. The staff meeting was called for the following Tuesday in the Grand Ballroom. It was a strange setting, usually reserved for weddings and galas, not labor disputes. The rich lobby sparkled just outside the heavy oak doors, a world away from their reality. Inside, the atmosphere was tense, the air filled with whispered rumors and fear. Gavin stood on the stage, flanked by lawyers and PR people in expensive suits. He looked down at the sea of uniforms, a king addressing his subjects. The contrast between his polished appearance and their worn-out gear was stark. "We are embarking on a new era for the Grand Meridian," Gavin announced. His voice boomed through the speakers, echoing off the high, gilded ceilings. "This revitalization will secure our future and bring prosperity to the city." But the workers exchanged skeptical glances. Prosperity for whom, exactly? They knew from the rent hikes that their future was not part of the plan. The back corridors where they lived and worked were being sold out from under them. They were the ghosts in the machine, expected to perform and then disappear. Noah stood at the back, leaning against a pillar in the shadows. He watched Gavin closely, noting the sweat on his brow despite the cool air conditioning. Gavin was nervous, which meant he was hiding something significant. Noah scanned the lawyers, recognizing one from a firm known for corporate raiding. This wasn't a renovation, it was a hostile takeover designed to strip the assets. The hotel was being cannibalized, and the staff were the first course. He clenched his jaw, his private purpose for being there burning in his chest. Arya sat near the front, her notebook open, pen poised to take notes. She felt the eyes of Gavin's enforcer on her, checking her reaction. The pressure to enter the fake invoices was still heavy on her mind. She looked back at Noah, finding strength in his calm, stoic presence. He gave her an imperceptible nod, a signal to stay strong and stay silent. They were playing a dangerous game, and the stakes were life and death. She took a deep breath, forcing her face to remain a mask of professional interest. "There will be sacrifices," Gavin continued, his tone shifting to faux empathy. "We must tighten our belts to ensure the project's success." He announced a freeze on wages and a suspension of benefits for contractors. Murmurs of outrage rippled through the crowd, quickly silenced by security guards. It was a naked power play, a clear message: resistance is futile and punished. The rich got bonuses for cutting costs, while the poor got cuts to their survival. It was the classic tale of the hotel hierarchy playing out in real time. "We also have a zero-tolerance policy for leaking information," Gavin added. His eyes swept the room, landing briefly on Noah, then on Arya. "We are a family here, and families protect their own secrets." The threat was thinly veiled: anyone who talks will be destroyed immediately. He was trying to isolate them, to make them feel alone and afraid. But as Arya looked around, she saw defiance in the eyes of her colleagues. They were beaten down, but they weren't broken, not yet, not completely. The meeting ended with a disjointed applause, orchestrated by the management team. The staff filed out, their spirits dampened but their resolve hardening. In the lobby, the guests were arriving for dinner, oblivious to the war just waged. The divide between the shiny public face and the dark private reality was absolute. Arya walked to the back, the echo of Gavin's threats ringing in her ears. Noah caught up with her in the hall, his presence a solid anchor in the storm. "He's scared," Noah whispered. "And scared men make dangerous mistakes." The next day, Arya found a thick envelope tucked under her locker door. Inside was a stack of cash, significantly more than her monthly salary. There was no note, just a key card to a room on the executive floor. She knew exactly what it was: a hush bonus, a bribe to buy her silence. Gavin knew she had questions about the invoices, about the rent hikes. He was trying to buy her compliance, to turn her into one of his pawns. It was the ultimate moral test: take the money and stay safe, or refuse and fall. Her hands shook as she counted the bills. It was enough to pay her mother's bills. It was enough to move them out of the staff housing and into a decent apartment. It was a lifeline, a way out of the debt trap that was closing in on them. But the price was her soul, her integrity, and her complicity in his crimes. If she took it, she would be owned by Gavin, unable to ever speak the truth. She would be trapped in his web, constantly fearful of the debt being called in. The cash felt dirty, like it was stained with the misery of her coworkers. She took the key card and walked to the elevator, her heart pounding a rhythm. She didn't go to the executive suite, but to the shuttle bay outside. Noah was polishing the van, his movements rhythmic and calming. She placed the envelope on the hood of the car, the money exposed to the light. "He offered me a way out," Arya said, her voice breaking under the strain. Noah looked at the cash, then at Arya, his expression unreadable and grave. "Did you take it?" he asked, his voice neutral, not judging, just seeking facts. "I wanted to," Arya confessed, tears finally spilling over her lashes. "It would solve everything for my mom. But I can't be part of this." She looked at the hotel, the towering monument to greed that employed them. "If I take this, I become just like him, using people for my own gain." It was her moral test, the defining moment of her character in this fight. She was choosing the hard road, the road of poverty over the road of corruption. It was a brave choice, but a terrifying one, leaving her vulnerable and exposed. Noah picked up the envelope, weighing the heavy temptation in his hand. "Gavin thinks everyone has a price," Noah said, his voice hard with anger. "He thinks we are all desperate enough to sell each other out for pocket change." He handed the envelope back to her, his eyes locking onto hers with intensity. "Keep it," he said, shocking her completely. Use it for your mother. Arya stared at him in disbelief. This went against everything he stood for. I can't, she stammered. It's blood money. It's a trap, Noah. It's a resource, Noah corrected her, a plan forming behind his eyes. Take the money. Let him think he owns you. Let him think you've been bought. He leaned in closer, lowering his voice to a barely audible whisper. But feed him information I give you, information we want him to see. It was a dangerous double-cross, a high-wire act without a safety net. They would turn Gavin's weapon against him, using his own bribe to trap him. It required Arya to be a better actor than Gavin, to lie with conviction. Can you do that? Noah asked, searching her face for any sign of hesitation. Can you look him in the eye and thank him while you plan his downfall? Arya looked at the money, then at Noah, seeing the strength he offered her. She realized this wasn't just about survival anymore, it was about justice. She took the envelope, sliding it back into her pocket with a steady hand. I can do it, she said, her voice gaining a new, steely resolve. But you have to promise me we nail him to the wall for this. The plan required them to be seen less together, a painful sacrifice. For weeks, they had been finding solace in each other's company in the shadows. They shared stolen moments in the laundry room and late-night conversations in the shuttle. But now, they had to maintain a professional distance to avoid Gavin's suspicion. They had to pretend that the rift Gavin was trying to create was actually working. It was a slow-burn romance that was suddenly forced into a deep freeze. The longing was palpable, a heavy silence that hung between them in the hallways. But one night, after a grueling double shift, the pretense slipped. The hotel was quiet, the guests asleep, the lobby dim and empty. Arya was sitting on the edge of the fountain in the courtyard, exhausted. Noah found her there, unable to resist the pull of seeing her one last time. He sat down next to her, their shoulders touching in the cool night air. It's getting harder to stay away, he admitted softly, vulnerability in his tone. I know, Arya replied, leaning her head on his shoulder for just a moment. They shared an honest night, stripping away the layers of their conspiracy. They talked about their dreams before the hotel, before the debt and the fear. Noah spoke of a desire for stability, for a life where his word meant something. Arya talked of her mother, of the fear of losing the only family she had left. The tenderness between them was overwhelming, a stark contrast to the cruelty of Gavin. In that moment, they weren't a driver and a receptionist, they were just two people. But the intimacy was a liability, a weakness that could be exploited by their enemy. I wish we could just drive away, Arya whispered, looking at the shuttle. Leave this place and never look back at the mess they've made here. Noah took her hand, his fingers interlacing with hers, a strong, warm grip. We will, he promised her. But not until we fix what we can here. It was a promise of a future, a distant light at the end of a dark tunnel. But it was also a dangerous admission, giving Gavin leverage if he found out. Loving each other gave them a reason to fight, but also a reason to fear. The moment was shattered by the sound of footsteps on the gravel path. They pulled apart quickly, turning to see a security guard rounding the corner. It was just a routine patrol, but it snapped them back to reality instantly. The vulnerability they had shared was now a secret weapon they had to hide. If Gavin knew how much they cared for each other, he would use it to hurt them. He would threaten Arya to control Noah, or vice versa, in a heartbeat. Their love was no longer just a feeling, it was a hostage in the making. Noah stood up, putting on the mask of the indifferent shuttle driver. Just checking the perimeter, making sure everything is secure out here. The guard nodded and walked on, oblivious to the emotional storm he had interrupted. Arya watched Noah go, her heart aching with the distance he had put between them. It was necessary, but it hurt like a physical wound in her chest. She realized that this was the cost of their war, the sacrifice of their happiness. She stood up and straightened her uniform, preparing to face the battle alone again. The next morning, the dynamic had shifted, they were colder, more professional. They exchanged curt nods in the hallway, ignoring the longing in their eyes. It was a performance, a necessary charade to keep their enemies at bay. But the tenderness of the night before lingered, a secret fuel for their resolve. They were fighting not just for their jobs, but for the possibility of a life together. And that made them more dangerous, because they had everything to lose. The romance under threat had transformed into a weapon of pure, focused determination. The debt trap tightened its grip on the hotel staff like a crushing vice. Payroll was delayed for the second time in a month, with no explanation given. Gavin cited banking errors and technical glitches in a dismissive email. But everyone knew the truth: the money was being siphoned off for the project. The staff cafeteria started running out of food, cutting corners on quality. The uniforms weren't washed, the linens were thin, and the morale hit rock bottom. It was a slow, suffocating starvation designed to force them into quitting. Then came the threatened layoffs, disguised as restructuring of operations. Lists were posted on the bulletin board, names of people marked for termination. The criteria were vague, citing performance issues that didn't actually exist. They were targeting the most vocal, the ones who asked questions or complained. It was a purge, a way to remove the potential troublemakers before the audit. Fear rippled through the staff, turning colleagues into paranoid, suspicious spies. No one knew who would be next, or who was reporting to Gavin's inner circle. Targeted policy violations began to spike, a clear tactic of harassment. Arya was written up for smiling insufficiently at a VIP guest. Noah was cited for taking an inefficient route on a routine shuttle run. The violations were petty, absurd, and designed to build a paper trail for firing. It was legal intimidation, using the rulebook as a weapon of oppression. Gavin was tightening the screws, enjoying the pain and panic he was inflicting. He wanted them broken, desperate, and willing to accept any terms to survive. Arya watched as her friends were marched out of the building by security. Hardworking people, fathers, mothers, students, discarded without a second thought. The rich lobby continued to sparkle, oblivious to the human tragedy occurring downstairs. The contrast was sickening. The guests complained about the slow service, while the staff were fighting to keep their homes and feed their children. The revitalization was built on the ruins of these people's lives. It was a moral crime, a sin that Gavin wore like a badge of honor. Noah fought back in his own quiet, subversive way, documenting everything. He kept a log of every violation, every delayed paycheck, every threat. He encouraged the staff to file grievances, clogging the HR department with complaints. It was a paperwork war, a way to slow down the machine and create a record. He knew that Gavin thrived on chaos. He needed to bring order and accountability. It was a dangerous game, but Noah was fueled by a cold, controlled anger. He had seen this before, the rich eating the poor, and he wouldn't stand for it. Arya used her position at the front desk to gather intelligence. She accessed guest records, looking for the investors Gavin was courting. She copied down license plates of cars visiting the executive suite late at night. She was risking her job every time she logged into a system she wasn't supposed to. But the hush money in her pocket gave her a false sense of security. She felt like a double agent, living a lie that was slowly consuming her soul. She hated the person she was becoming, deceptive and fearful in the shadows. The pressure was immense, pushing them to their breaking points daily. Their romance was reduced to fleeting glances and coded messages. The tenderness they had shared was buried under layers of strategy and survival. They were soldiers in the trenches, covered in the mud of the corporate war. But they hadn't given up. In fact, the oppression only strengthened their resolve. They knew that Gavin was getting desperate, and desperate men made mistakes. And they were waiting, watching, and ready to catch him when he fell. Gavin summoned Arya to his office again, the atmosphere thicker than before. He offered her a promotion to front office manager, a title with prestige. It came with a significant raise, her own office, and a window with a view. It was everything she had ever worked for, a validation of her hard work. But there were poison strings attached, dangling like a noose around her neck. "You would report directly to me," Gavin purred, leaning in close to her. I need someone I can trust to handle the sensitive guest relations. The sensitive guest relations was a euphemism for covering up his tracks. He wanted her to intercept complaints, to smooth over the fraud and the eviction notices. He wanted her beautiful, honest face to be the mask for his ugly corruption. It was a test of her loyalty, and a trap to bind her to him completely. The promotion would make her complicit in his crimes, legally and morally. If she accepted, she would be managing the deportation of her own friends. She would be the one explaining why the staff housing was being condemned. "I'm honored, Mr. Rourke," Arya said, forcing a smile she didn't feel. "But I need some time to think about the new responsibilities involved." Gavin's smile didn't reach his eyes, they remained cold, predatory, and calculating. "Of course, Arya. Take the day. But remember, opportunities like this are rare." He let the threat hang in the air. "Take it, or lose everything you have now." He was offering her a golden cage, a comfortable cell with a nice view. He was testing to see if the hush money had done its job properly. She walked out of the office, her legs feeling like lead weights. She found Noah in the service elevator, a chance encounter orchestrated by fate. "He offered me the manager job," she blurted out, the words spilling out. Noah didn't look surprised. He knew Gavin was desperate for a shield. "Did he say what the job entails?" Noah asked, his voice a low rumble. "He wants me to be his fixer, his liar to the guests and staff." Arya replied, disgust evident in the tone of her quiet, shaky voice. "It's not a job offer, Arya. It's a demand for your allegiance," Noah stated, pressing the stop button on the elevator to halt their descent. "He wants to own you, to use your credibility to hide his debts." He turned to face her, the dim light casting shadows across his serious face. "If you take it, you can't help us. You become part of the problem." It was the hardest thing he had ever said to her, pushing her away from safety. He was asking her to sacrifice her career for the sake of the truth. "I know," Arya whispered, tears welling up in her exhausted eyes. "But I can't pay for my mom's treatment on a receptionist's salary. The promotion comes with insurance that covers her specialists, Noah." She was torn between her duty to the collective and her love for her mother. It was a cruel dilemma, a choice between two forms of survival and integrity. Noah looked at her, his heart breaking for the impossible position she was in. He knew that Gavin had designed this specifically to break her spirit. "Don't decide yet," Noah said softly, releasing the stop button. "Let me see if I can find another way to get the leverage we need." He had a lead on the sealed letter, a whisper of where it might be hidden. "If we find that letter, we won't need Gavin's job. We'll own him." The elevator doors opened, and Noah stepped out, leaving Arya with her torment. She had to choose between the easy path of betrayal or the hard path of poverty. But as she watched him walk away, she knew her heart had already made the choice. A missing document became the next weapon in the office war against the staff. A crucial permit for the renovation site disappeared from the front desk files. Gavin was furious, screaming at the management team, demanding heads roll. The blame began drifting toward the lowest paid employees immediately, as planned. It was a classic scapegoat tactic: create a problem, blame the vulnerable. Arya was questioned, her honesty scrutinized by a security team she didn't know. Who had access to the files? Who was working the front desk that night? The questioning was aggressive, designed to intimidate and extract false confessions. They were looking for a culprit, anyone to take the fall for the missing permit. Arya knew she hadn't taken it, but she also knew that proof didn't matter. Gavin needed a villain to explain the delay to his angry investors. The poor staff were convenient targets, lacking the resources to defend themselves. It was a witch hunt in the hotel lobby, conducted in whispers and glares. Noah watched from the shadows, seeing the trap being set for Arya clearly. He knew who had taken the document, or rather, who had hidden it. It wasn't a staff member, it was Gavin's assistant, under orders to create chaos. The delay was a way to buy time, to stall the audit while money was moved. But blaming the staff served a dual-purpose: fear and distraction from the truth. Noah needed to prove this, but he couldn't access the security cameras openly. He was just a driver. He had no authority, only his wits and his observation. He had to find a way to see the footage without alerting the perpetrators. Meanwhile, Arya was suspended pending the investigation into the missing file. She was sent home without pay, her access badge confiscated at the door. It was a public humiliation, walking past her co-workers in silence, escorted out. The rich guest stared, whispering about the thief in the neat uniform. Gavin watched from the mezzanine, satisfied with the destruction of her reputation. He had effectively neutralized a threat and sent a message to everyone else. No one was safe, no matter how hard they worked or how loyal they were. At home, Arya sat by her mother's bedside, feeling helpless and angry. The suspension meant no paycheck, which meant no medicine for her mom. The stakes had escalated from job security to immediate life and health. Gavin wasn't just playing games, he was attacking her family's survival directly. The romance with Noah felt like a distant memory, a luxury she couldn't afford. She was alone in the fight, isolated and cut off from the information flow. But in her isolation, her resolve hardened into a cold, sharp diamond. Noah found a way into the security room, posing as a repairman. He had stolen a uniform from the maintenance locker, a risky but necessary move. He plugged a drive into the DVR, downloading the footage from the night. His heart raced as the progress bar crawled across the screen, slow and agonizing. If he was caught, he would be fired, or worse, arrested for corporate espionage. But he had to clear Arya's name. He couldn't let Gavin destroy her like this. It was the first time he had acted purely on emotion, not just strategy. He got the footage and slipped out just before a guard walked in. He retreated to the shuttle, reviewing the video on a small tablet he owned. There it was, clear as day, the assistant taking the file from the desk. She looked around nervously before slipping it into her bag and walking away. It was the smoking gun, the proof of the setup and the lie. But how to use it? Going to HR would be useless. They worked for Gavin. He needed to take it public, to bypass the hotel's corrupt internal justice. He had the weapon, but he needed the right battlefield to deploy it. With her suspension, Arya had time to finally go through the hush paperwork. She spread the fake invoices out on her small kitchen table, studying them. The stress of the suspension gave her a clarity she hadn't had before. She was no longer afraid of losing her job. She had already lost it, in essence. So she looked closer at the dates, the stamps, and the names involved. She found a trail of dates and stamps that didn't belong together logically. An invoice for demolition was dated 2 weeks before the permits were filed. It was a small discrepancy, but a crucial one in the timeline of fraud. How could you pay for demolition before you even had legal permission to build? It proved that the money wasn't for construction, it was for something else. It was likely being siphoned out through shell companies before the audit. Arya traced the connections with a red pen, mapping the web of deceit. She realized that Gavin wasn't just building on shaky ground, he was stealing the foundation. The revitalization was just a shell game to move massive amounts of debt. She called Noah, using a burner phone she had bought with the hush cash. The dates on the invoices don't match the public records, she said excitedly. He's paying people for work that can't legally happen yet. It's money laundering. Noah listened, his mind connecting her find to the signature mismatch he had seen. He is paying himself back, Noah realized. He borrowed against the hotel, and now he's funneling the cash out to pay off his personal investors. It was a massive Ponzi scheme, and the staff were the ones holding the bag. I have the footage of his assistant planting the evidence on me, Noah told her. We have the proof of the setup, and we have the proof of the fraud. It was coming together, the pieces of the puzzle forming a clear picture. But they still needed the final piece, the one thing that tied it all together. They needed the sealed letter that the guest had screamed about that night. That letter supposedly contained the original loan agreement, the source of the debt. If they had that, they could prove the predatory nature of the entire project. "We need to get back into the hotel," Arya said, her voice gaining strength. "The night of the gala. Security will be focused on the guests, not the staff." It was a risky plan, infiltrating the hotel during the biggest event of the year. But it was also the perfect cover, a chaos in which they could move unseen. Gavin would be showing off, distracted by his wealthy donors and investors. He would never expect the suspended, disgraced receptionist to return to the scene. Sometimes the best place to hide is right in the open, under the lights. Noah agreed, knowing it was their best and possibly last chance to strike. "I'll get us uniforms. I know a way in through the service tunnels." He had spent years exploring the bowels of the hotel, learning its secrets. He knew the blind spots of the cameras and the schedules of the patrols. "We find the letter in Gavin's office, and we get out," he planned. "And then we drop the bomb on all of them, in public, for everyone to see." It was a suicide mission, but the alternative was to let Gavin win and crush them. Arya looked at her sleeping mother, then at the evidence on the table. She was fighting for her, for the decent people she worked with, and for herself. The slow-burn romance with Noah had ignited into a roaring fire of rebellion. She was no longer the victim of the debt trap, she was the hunter in the night. She packed the red pen and the burner phone, preparing for the battle ahead. The fear was still there, cold and gripping in her stomach, but it was different. It was the fear of a soldier going to war, not a sheep going to slaughter. Noah's coincidences were starting to stack up too high to ignore. Someone in the finance department noticed his queries about the old loan records. They saw a pattern of a driver asking questions that only an auditor should ask. Noah had been too careful, too precise, and eventually, precision attracts attention. Gavin was informed that the shuttle driver was showing an unusual interest in the archives. "He's just a nosy peasant," Gavin dismissed it initially, but the seed of doubt was planted. "Maybe he's working with that girl, with Arya. Keep an eye on him." The surveillance was tightened on Noah, watching his every move with scrutiny. He noticed the tails, the security guards lingering a bit too long nearby. He saw the cameras tracking his path through the lobby, the red lights blinking. He knew that his cover was blown, or at least, that he was on the radar now. He had to be faster, smarter, and more reckless than he had ever been before. The private purpose he carried, the secret of his identity, was in danger of exposure. He had to accelerate the timeline, striking before they could neutralize him. He began to make mistakes on purpose, sloppy errors in his driving logs. He wanted them to think he was incompetent, not calculating and dangerous. He played the role of the confused, frustrated worker to perfection. "I don't know, boss, the numbers just look weird to me," he would say. He lowered his head, appearing submissive, hiding the sharp glint in his eyes. It was a dance of deception, trying to appear harmless while holding a knife. But he knew that one wrong step would lead to the trap snapping shut. The pressure was immense, the walls closing in on him from all sides. He couldn't contact Arya directly, all their communications were being monitored. They had to rely on the old plan, the rendezvous at the gala, blindly. If one of them was caught, the other had to be strong enough to finish it. Noah prepared the uniforms, stealing them from the laundry with a steady hand. He packed the evidence he had gathered, the drive and the photos, into a hidden pocket. He was ready to burn it all down, even if it burned him in the process. The night of the gala arrived, the hotel dressed in its finest finery. Luxury cars lined the circular drive, dropping off the city's elite and powerful. Noah watched from the shadows of the parking garage, wearing his stolen uniform. He looked like just another driver, a faceless fixture in the background of the event. But inside his pocket was the drive that could destroy the guest of honor, Gavin. He waited for Arya, scanning the dark corners of the service entrance. She appeared, her face pale but determined, wearing a maid's uniform. They didn't speak, just a nod of acknowledgement before slipping inside. They moved through the kitchens, avoiding the bustling preparations for the banquet. The heat was oppressive, the smell of roasting meat and expensive wine filling the air. Upstairs, the orchestra was tuning up, the sound drifting down like a mockery. They were two ghosts haunting the machine, invisible to the revelers above. They reached the service elevators, the key card Noah had stolen working perfectly. They ascended towards the penthouse, the heart of the beast's lair. As the elevator rose, Noah looked at Arya, seeing the terror and bravery in her. He wanted to reach out and hold her, to tell her it would be okay. But there were cameras in the elevator, watching their every move with cold eyes. They stood in silence, shoulder to shoulder, preparing for the final confrontation. This was it, the moment of truth, the point of no return for them both. Whatever happened in the next hour would define the rest of their lives. The doors opened, and they stepped out into the plush, silent corridor of power. The charity auction was in full swing in the grand ballroom below them. Gavin stood on the stage, bathed in the spotlight, holding a gavel like a scepter. "Ladies and gentlemen, we are here to support the future of our great city." He gestured to the projection of the revitalization project, drawing applause. "But tonight, we also celebrate the people who make this hotel run." It was a lie, a cruel setup for the public humiliation he had orchestrated. Noah and Arya crept down the stairs from the mezzanine, hidden behind a velvet curtain. "And to show our appreciation, we have a special item up for bid tonight." Gavin's voice boomed, a twisted excitement evident in his tone. "The deed to the staff housing compound, currently under renovation." The crowd murmured, confused, as a screen showed pictures of the modest dorms. "Think of it as an investment opportunity, a chance to redevelop this prime land." He was auctioning off their homes, in front of them, to the highest wealthy bidder. It was a display of dominance, a public stripping of their dignity and security. "Starting bid at $2 million, Gavin announced, ignoring the gasps. He pointed to the staff who were serving drinks, his target clearly in mind. "These wonderful people will, of course, be relocated. Or compensated." The compensation was the zero-tolerance policy, the eviction notices they all feared. He was using their suffering as entertainment for the rich, a spectacle of greed. Arya gripped the curtain, her knuckles white, fighting the urge to scream. She watched as her co-workers' faces fell, realizing they were being sold. $3 million. Do I hear 3.5? Gavin shouted, smiling. He was enjoying this, the feeling of playing God with people's lives. It was the ultimate power trip, rich versus poor in its most naked, ugly form. The rich bidders laughed, seeing it as a game, a business transaction. The poor staff stood frozen, realizing that they were nothing to these people. They were inventory to be liquidated, obstacles to be removed for profit. The humiliation was total, irreversible in its damage to their collective soul. Sold. To the gentleman in the front for $4 million. Gavin roared. The crowd cheered, clapping for the destruction of a community. Noah looked at Arya, seeing the tears streaming down her face in the shadows. This was the breaking point, the moment where fear turned into pure, unadulterated rage. "Noah," she whispered. "We have to stop him. We have to stop him now." He nodded, his hand going into his pocket to grip the drive tightly. They couldn't wait for Gavin's office, they had to act here, in the open. But before they could move, the spotlight suddenly shifted to the mezzanine. Gavin had seen them, or perhaps he had been waiting for them to appear. "And speaking of our staff, we have 2 employees who tried to steal from us." The spotlight blinded Arya and Noah, exposing them to the hundreds of guests below. "Arya and Noah, please come down. We have a prize for you too." It was a trap, a staged takedown designed to finalize their public destruction. The crowd booed, turning their hatred towards the thieves on the balcony. Security guards grabbed them from behind, dragging them toward the stairs. They struggled, but it was futile against the strength of the hired muscle. Gavin watched from the stage, a look of triumph on his face. He had won. He had sold the housing, silenced the dissenters, and humiliated them. The rich laughed at the spectacle, enjoying the drama of the evening. As they were dragged down the stairs, Noah looked at Arya, his eyes screaming a message. It wasn't over. The sealed letter was still out there, and so was the truth. The chaos of the arrest provided the perfect distraction for the unexpected. Just as Noah was being handcuffed, a loud crash echoed from the lobby entrance. A wild-looking man, the guest from the shuttle weeks ago, burst into the ballroom. "I told you. I told you it was forged," he screamed, waving a paper over his head. "I have the sealed letter. The one you tried to bury. The one you killed for." The music stopped, the crowd falling silent in shock at the interruption. Gavin froze on stage, his face draining of color as he recognized the man. The guest, Julian, rushed the stage, tackled by security before he could reach Gavin. But as he fell, he threw the sealed letter into the air, a white missile of truth. It glided through the spotlight, landing on the edge of the auction stage. All eyes were on it, a single envelope that held the power to ruin an empire. The chain of debt was about to crack open, and the rich were panicking behind closed doors. Noah saw his chance and kicked the guard holding him, breaking free for a second. He lunged for the stage, driven by a desperation to seize the evidence. Arya joined him, fighting off the confusion to reach the letter at the same time. They reached the stage together, grabbing the envelope before Gavin's men could. The crowd gasped as the thieves stood on the stage, holding the evidence. Gavin was shouting orders, his voice cracking, "Get them. Get that letter." But the mood in the room had shifted. The curiosity was too strong to ignore. "Read it," someone shouted from the audience. "Read what it says." The power dynamic was trembling, the balance shifting in real time. Noah ripped open the seal, his hands trembling, not with fear, but with adrenaline. He pulled out the document, the original loan agreement for the hotel purchase. It wasn't a loan from a bank, as Gavin had claimed for years. It was a private debt instrument, a bridge loan with a callable clause. And the lender was not a faceless corporation, but a name that made Noah pause. He looked at the signature, the name at the bottom of the document. It was a name that had been planted in the story, a name from the past. This document certifies that the debt is held by the Harrington Trust. Noah read aloud, his voice ringing clear through the stunned ballroom. "And the trustee is Noah Harrington," he finished, looking up at Gavin. The silence was deafening, a vacuum where the applause had been moments ago. Arya looked at him, shock rewriting her understanding of everything they had shared. The poor shuttle driver was the primary creditor, the owner of the hotel's debt. Gavin staggered back, his face a mask of pure, unadulterated terror. The man he had hired, the man he had humiliated, was his boss all along. "You." Gavin choked out, pointing a shaking finger at Noah. "You're him." Noah straightened his uniform, the posture of a servant shedding its disguise. "I told you I had a private purpose for being close to the finances," Noah said, his voice commanding a respect that hushed the room. "I bought the debt 2 years ago, when your father's estate collapsed. I didn't want the hotel. I wanted to stop the man running it into the ground." The rich panic was audible now, whispers of realization spreading like wildfire. The debt trap Gavin had used on others had just snapped shut on his own neck. "The loan is in default, Gavin," Noah said, holding the paper high. "I am calling in the debt. Effective immediately, I am seizing the assets." He looked at the auctioneer, then at the security guards. "You work for me now." The guards hesitated, then lowered their weapons, shifting their allegiance. Gavin was alone on the stage, the king stripped of his crown and his power. The public reversal was absolute, the tables turned in a matter of seconds. The humiliation he had inflicted on Arya was now his own, magnified by infinity. The revelation hung in the air like a physical weight, crushing Gavin beneath it. The shock identity of Noah Harrington, the primary creditor, was finally proven. It explained everything: the knowledge of the law, the access to the books, the patience. He hadn't been just a driver, he had been an undercover auditor, a judge in waiting. The planted details clicked into place with satisfying precision, the signature mismatch. The precise understanding of the complex debt instruments, the calm under pressure. He had been the wolf in sheep's clothing, waiting for the moment to strike. Arya looked at him with a mix of awe and confusion, her world turned upside down. "Why didn't you tell me?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper in the quiet. "Because if you knew, you would have been in danger, Arya. Gavin has spies." Noah looked at her with softness, the romance re-emerging from the ashes of the lie. "I needed you to be real, not an actor in my play. And you were." He reached out to touch her face, but the moment was interrupted by Gavin's desperate scream. "You can't do this. I have contracts. I have investors." Gavin ranted, his eyes wild. "You have fraud, Gavin," Noah corrected him coldly. "And I have the proof." Noah turned to the crowd of wealthy guests, holding up the drive he carried. "This drive contains the footage of your assistant framing Arya. And the copies of the fake invoices you used to launder the money." He tossed the drive to the police chief who had just arrived, drawn by the commotion. "Chief, I believe you have enough evidence to charge Mr. Rourke with embezzlement." The crowd began to boo Gavin, the rich turning on him with ferocity. No one liked a loser, especially a criminal loser who had lost their money. The accountability was landing, swift and merciless, just as Noah had planned. The public humiliation was now Gavin's alone, stripped of his power and dignity. He was handcuffed and led away, still screaming about his connections and lawyers. But the law was clear, and the evidence was undeniable in front of everyone. The investors swarmed Noah, not with anger, but with greed, offering new deals. "Mr. Harrington, we can work with this. We can build something real," they said. Noah looked at them with the same disdain he had once shown the shuttle passengers. "I'm not selling," he said firmly. "This hotel is going to be run right this time." He turned to Arya, seeing the exhaustion and relief in her slumped shoulders. "You're the manager, Arya. The real one. Not the puppet job he offered you," Noah said, offering her the position with genuine respect and trust. "You know this place better than anyone. You know the people and the problems." Arya stared at him, overwhelmed by the sudden shift in her reality and fate. She went from a suspended, destitute employee to the second-in-command in a moment. It was a redemption that felt earned, a justice payoff for her years of struggle. "What about the staff housing?" she asked, her voice gaining strength again. "The auction is void," Noah declared, looking at the stunned auctioneer. "I own the debt on that land too, and am forgiving it. It belongs to the staff." A cheer erupted from the back of the room, from the waitstaff and the cleaners. The rich and poor divide remained, but the tyranny had been broken by the truth. Noah had used his wealth and power to protect the vulnerable, not to exploit them. It was a moral victory, a rare instance of the system working for the little guy. But the emotional scar remained, a jagged line through their history. Arya looked at Noah, the man she loved, who had lied to her from the start. She was grateful for the justice, but hurt by the deception and the distance. "We have a lot to talk about," she said, her voice guarded but open. "I know," Noah replied, his eyes full of regret and hope. "I have a lot to explain." The romance wasn't neatly healed by the victory, it was complicated by the secrets. They had won the war, but the peace between them was fragile and uncertain. Love survives, but it is changed by the fires it has been forced to endure. In the weeks that followed, the Grand Meridian underwent a transformation of soul. Gavin was awaiting trial, his assets frozen, his reputation in tatters forever. The revitalization project was scrapped, replaced by a genuine renovation of the staff housing. Arya took over as the general manager, implementing policies of fairness and respect. She increased wages, restored benefits, and created a real community for the workers. The rich still came to the hotel, but they were no longer treated like gods. They were guests, expected to treat the staff with the same dignity they expected. The power hierarchy was still there, but it was no longer a weapon of abuse. Noah stepped back from the daily operations, preferring the shadows. He had proven his point, reclaimed his family's legacy, and defeated the corrupter. But he didn't want to be the boss, he wanted to be a partner and a protector. He spent his time ensuring the financial stability of the hotel and the staff trust. He audited the books, not to find fraud, but to ensure the profits were shared. He was the silent guardian, the rich benefactor who wore a mechanic's jumpsuit. The contrast of his wealth and his lifestyle was a statement he made every day. He and Arya worked together, navigating the awkwardness of their new dynamic. There were moments of tenderness, quiet coffees in the now-staffed cafeteria. But there were also moments of tension, arguments about trust and honesty. "I did what I had to do to protect the people I care about," Noah would say. "You did what you thought was right, Noah. But you didn't trust me to fight." Arya would counter, her heart still aching from the weight of his lies. It was a slow process of healing, a redemption that cost them their innocent ignorance. The legal battles continued, as Gavin's lawyers tried every trick in the book. But Noah's evidence was bulletproof, and the public pressure was immense. The story of the driver who owned the hotel became a legend in the city. It was a tale of justice payoff, of the little guy sticking it to the man. But for Noah and Arya, it wasn't a fairy tale, it was just their life, messy and real. They had scars that wouldn't fade, reminders of the fear and the betrayal. But they also had a shared victory, a bond forged in the fires of a corporate war. One evening, as the sun set over the city, casting a golden glow over the lobby, Noah found Arya sitting on the edge of the fountain, the same spot as before. He sat down next to her, the air between them filled with unspoken words. "The staff are happy," Arya said, breaking the silence. "My mom is doing better. The hotel is profitable again," Noah added. "For the first time in years." They sat in the quiet peace, the chaos of the past year finally settling into dust. They had survived the trap, the humiliation, and the lies, relatively intact. "I'm sorry I didn't tell you," Noah said, turning to look at her. "I was so focused on being the Avenger that I forgot how to be a human being." Arya looked at him, seeing the man behind the mask, the man she had fallen for. "I forgive you, Noah," she said softly. "But don't lie to me again. Ever." "I won't," he promised. "From now on, the truth is the only thing that matters." He took her hand, and this time, he didn't let go, even when the guards walked by. They were no longer a secret, they were the leaders of this new, honest world. The hotel stood tall behind them, no longer a monument of greed, but a place of life. The light from the lobby spilled out onto the street, warm and inviting to all. The rich versus poor narrative had been rewritten, not erased, but improved. There was still a hierarchy, but it was one of merit and respect, not cruelty. Noah and Arya sat together, the scars of their battle hidden but not forgotten. They had found justice, but it had cost them their innocence and their ease. And as the city lights twinkled below, they knew the fight was truly, finally worth it. The story of the Grand Meridian is a stark reminder that the lines between power and vulnerability are often drawn by those who fear losing control. We saw how easily debt can be used as a weapon, and how the rich can manipulate systems to crush the poor under the guise of progress. But we also witnessed the resilience of the human spirit, the courage to fight back even when the odds are impossible. Noah and Arya's journey wasn't just about exposing a fraud, it was about reclaiming dignity in a world that tried to strip it away. Justice was served, but not without leaving emotional scars that serve as permanent reminders of the battle. Their love, tested by secrets and danger, survived but was forever changed, hardened by the truth yet softened by the struggle. If you believe in standing up to power and value stories where the underdog fights back, make sure to like this video and share it with your friends. Let us know in the comments if you've ever witnessed a workplace injustice or if you'd fight back like Noah and Arya did. Your stories matter, and your voice is powerful. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell to join our community for more deep dive storytelling. We have more incredible tales of betrayal, identity, and redemption coming up that you won't want to miss. Thank you for watching, and remember, the truth may be heavy, but it's the only thing worth carrying.